All right, today is the sleep deprivation edition of the live read because our son has decided that rolling over is much more interesting than actually going to sleep, so we're not sleeping. But I'm going to be reading Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a short chapter. That'll be it for today. This will probably be in the 20-minute episode range, much like the last episode. So this is entirely set in the city of Yulinar as Trem and the others that have been granted permission by the listener, Wayna Ainuari, to enter the city are going in and kind of is going to give you an overview of what Yulinar and the Malarians are actually like. So, by the time the group from the Oasis had reached the outskirts of Yulinar, the sun was almost down and the temperature was falling. Udo and Wayna conferred, and it was decided they would camp for the night and enter the city in the morning. Jovan walked to the nearest tall dune and strained to see the city, but all he could catch a glimpse of was a mass of lights in the distance. Unable to make out any particulars, he went to bed down with the others. In the morning they broke camp swiftly, and within an hour of hard riding, were coming over the dunes to the wide sand valley that had held the immense city of Yulinar. For those who were not of the Dominion, the sight was beyond breathtaking. Tall spires with rounded domes rose from a seemingly endless sea of clay and sandstone buildings that stretched in every direction. The city spiraled out from broad squares where Udo told them wells were set up for public use, for their daily needs. The edges of the city were a mass of brightly colored tents, merchants and traders from all over the endless sands selling all kinds of goods. These tents, Udo explained, would remain there for whoever came and was in need of them. Within the first section of permanent structures, one could find the inns and bunkhouses for those who did not live within the city. Once past those, there were the homes of the lower-class laborers and common workers. As one progressed further into the city, the homes grew larger and more ornate, so that it seemed the middle of Yulinar sat on a small central hill, but Udo told them the valley was totally flat. The illusion of a mound in the middle was created by increasingly tall structures leading to the center of its vast stretch of habitation. Rising high above all the other buildings around it, nestled among the other grand structures, was an incredibly high and sheer tower that narrowed as it rose before widening into a rounded ball topped with a spike-like minaret. That place, which dwarfed all around it, was the seat of the sages of Yulinar. Udo explained that all of those who wore the specially colored robes, like he and Wayna, were sages, the foundation of the Dominion's government and the very lifeblood of its culture. The mighty tower at the center of the city was where the most revered of the sages met, and it was perhaps there that Trem would have to be presented to them at some point. But first we should bring you to meet Athor Ein-Elman, who lives not far from the tower. She is, of course, Wrath's mother, but also the most revered keeper in all the Dominion. If travelers gather information and listeners discern lies and truths, Jovan asked Udo, what role do keepers play? Keepers are the most elusive of our people, Wayna answered him. They catalog all information from every order of sages and the gods and the common men and women. The wisest of them have the power to wield Eversand, which is our oldest gift used in divination. It allows us to see the threads of time across all the world and even some of the godly realms. The keepers are often very aloof and distant because they spend so much of their time among greater powers than those we encounter. They see things. Wayna paused as though trying to think of how to articulate her meaning. Very differently. Udo nodded in his agreement. Travelers gather information, speakers communicate with gods, tellers bring word of the gods and mortals to our people, listeners protect us from deceit within our own, and the keepers... He grinned as he realized he too had difficulty explaining the purpose of their order. They consider more complex issues. And the Watchers protect you, Trem added, at least from the outside world. In their way, yes, Udo agreed, but Watchers are not sages. You'll note that Wrath Ibathor Ein-Elman dressed quite differently from us all. Sages wear robes of bright colors with hoods and sashes. As if realizing his own contradictory appearance, Udo touched his heirloom symbols of far-off lands sewn to his simple worn robe and smiled to himself, though some of us do enjoy a bit of modification. Such is the way of travelers, Wayna said in an irritated voice. They go off to other realms and adhere less ardently to our ways. Pardon me, Diaga said politely, but didn't you send Wrath to kill Trem? Are we going to be in danger here? Udo's face grew uncharacteristically serious, and he exchanged a look with Wayna before answering. We of the Dominion are opposed to violence in all forms, but there are surely some who wish you harm. Stay with myself or Wayna Ainuari while here, and we shall keep you safe. I'm certain that Athor Ein-Elman will have provided whatever is necessary to protect you here. Without further discussion, they began their descent toward Yulinar. The size of the city had been evident from afar, but as they closed with it, and more noise reached them just as the buildings grew taller and taller, it became even more evident just how massive Yulinar was. The newcomers also noted how incredibly beautiful much of the architecture was, even on the small and squat homes at the city's extreme edge. The square and flat roof of each house had simple but pleasing patterns painted in bright blues, reds, or greens, all along the underside of small overhangs. Most of the number of windows and doors were framed or painted in the same colors, while the buildings themselves were all white or tan in color. The contrast gave each a simplistic but pleasing look, while the white or tan of the stone and mud bricks made the entire collection of structures seem to shine in the sun. As they passed by the tents and merchants calling out their wares, Trem and the others were amazed at the variety of foods, pottery, textiles, clothes, and many other goods that were for sale. Most of the merchants appeared to be more interested in bartering than taking gold or silver for their stock. Udo explained that Yulinar had coins and used them, but it was far more common to exchange item for item depending on what was needed. The few outsiders who came to the city often found this made getting what they required difficult, though some of the inns operated solely on traditional currency to accommodate the few people from other lands allowed to visit Yulinar. And it was surely a very few people, for the newcomers were stared at by just about every man, woman, and child they passed. Their small group also brought a wave of silence everywhere they went, for their mere presence seemed to call a halt to all manner of activity happening around them. The party found themselves quite uncomfortable at being under such scrutiny, and Joven brought his mount near Udo and asked, "Are they afraid of us? I've never felt so unwanted in a place before." Udo laughed lightly. "They are always amazed at the sight of white men and women here. A very small number of foreigners are permitted to come to Yulinar at all, and almost none of them are accompanied by sages and fire cats. They know you are important in some way. The eyes on you will be more discreet when we get closer to city center." Trem's litter was now being carried on the shoulders of 4 fire cats, and he was able to see about him quite well. He called out to Udo, having heard his exchange with Joven. "Do they know who I am? I mean the city. Do they know what Wrath was sent to do?" Udo did not answer him, waiting as the party passed through the first several blocks of homes, inns, and shops and entered a large square. There he had them set Trem down and dismounted, joined by Wayna and followed by the others. Going to the well, he took a large clay jug and a tray set with cups from a man standing by it, and brought it over. He poured out fresh, beautifully clear water for each and handed it to them. When he passed Trem his cup, he said, "The word of the sage's decision reached the people through the tellers some time ago. You'll see them as we pass through the city on small stone platforms dressed in bright red and delivering the word of the day to the commoners. For now they know nothing more than you are an important foreigner granted an audience in Yulinar, based on your company and the direction we are leading you. Wayna and I were sworn to secrecy by Athor Ein Alman when she sent us to meet you at the oasis. But by the time you meet her yourself, it is likely others will know you are here, and the wisest may reason why you're going to her home." Udo's normally jovial face grew grim. "It is then that you should be more cautious, Trem Waterhound. I do not believe that my people will respect the will. I wish to believe the people will respect the will of our keeper, but some will argue Wrath betrayed that same will and the will of all sages in Yulinar. By law, no harm can come to you here, but violations are not unheard of." Trem drank his water and nodded his head in understanding. The urgency of their journey had not quite struck him until then. He was now more eager than ever to get his legs healed if it could be done. He did not relish the idea of being attacked when he was so unfit to defend himself. Javanileth crouched by him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll stay with Trem, to ensure nothing happens to him." "It would be best if all of you stay your hands," Wayna said quietly. "It is understood that our outsiders carry weapons, and the people here will accept that, but it would be a show of good faith for you to leave them in your quarters once they are provided. So we are in potential danger, but you not carry our weapons openly. I suppose it would demonstrate we mean to abide by the laws of the city to leave such things out of reach, and maybe spare us from looking like we mean harm." Trem laughed slightly as he considered how irrelevant such concerns were for him, not that I have a weapon or the capacity to use it. Udo smiled. "Yes, it may not matter much for you at the moment. We should continue on. It takes a great deal of time to pass through the city." Udo Ibvat Ein Elme was a master of understatements. The journey took them several hours, though it was unclear how far they actually traveled. As they moved further and further towards the interior, the buildings around them grew larger and more elaborate, providing some much appreciated shade from the sun, but glinting occasionally blindingly, as the rays from it reflected off the gilded spires, domes, and towers that appeared more and more the further they got from the city edge. The dress of the people on the street also grew more audacious, with thin silks of all colors covering most of the passerby, though in some cases the transparency of the cloth was such that they were quite revealing, and Joven blushed more than a few times. For his part, Diaga tried to keep his eyes on the riders in front of him, but his embarrassment appeared to amuse Caliandro to no end. At last they reached the largest square they had come to in the city. It was a carefully constructed mosaic of 3 circles, at the center of which was an elaborate well. And as the circles expanded outward, brighter tiles of silver and gold shone in the sun. Udo explained that the square mirrored the stars in the sky overhead, and Trem found himself searching for constellations that he recognized. Diaga was more enchanted by a large structure to their left, which rose up at one side of the vast square and dominated the elaborate buildings about it. The great double doors of the place were twice as tall as the riders, even on their mounts, and set with brass circles on long, heavy wood slats that emerged every 5 feet. To either side of the doors rose 2 immense towers, topped with wide domes, tipped with small points, and a curving and breathtaking stained glass window, nearly the size of the broad doors that depicted a stack of books, the symbol of Lautian, the god of knowledge. Udo brought his camel near to Diaga and gestured towards the structure with one hand. "Behold the great library of Yulinar. I thought you might find this place to your liking, young mage." Diaga could not answer at first, leaning from one side to another as he tried to gauge the size of the library. It seemed to extend back several blocks, and the roof, slightly peaked, unlike the flatter ones of the homes, rose almost as high as the towers framing it. How many texts must there be in there? He said to himself. Udo patted him on the back, replying, "A vast number, too many for one man to ever hope to make a dent in during his lifetime. You will not have so long, I think, but you may have as much time as you can muster. I will see to it you're admitted, if Keeper Athor herself does not." The group then turned and began passing through the square, the substantial height of the library on their left, and the many intricate carved stones of manors all around them. A main street, angled just slightly off the terminus of the one they had come from, awaited them, and appeared to lead past the mightiest spire that stood at the very center of the city. Udo explained that they were now quite near, only a few minutes' ride from the square to Athor Einelmann's home, where she was waiting for them. Joven craned his neck to see the top of the tallest tower they were so very near to, but had to give up as attempting to look caused him discomfort. Neep was moving stealthily to one side of the group, her head turning this way and that as she tried to take in her surroundings, overwhelming as they were. Diaga sensed her nervousness and halted, wanting to walk with her to see if it would help. As the group slowed to wait for the crowd to thin, the mass of men and women, which had been significant since they entered the square, but not an impediment to their progress, seemed to melt away from the entry to the street they were making for. A procession of sages, most robed in blue but a few in red and yellow, came and stood before them, blocking their path. Wayna turned her camel somewhat protectively as though to prevent them from seeing who was riding with them, and bowed her head in greeting. "Farah Ein Tevanir, it is a pleasure to see you." The blue-robed woman in the front of the group made no sign of acknowledgement, instead addressing Udo. "Udo Evat Ein Elme, I am not surprised to see you acting as aid to these interlopers, but I am disappointed." The traveler turned from where he'd been watching Diaga's efforts with Neep, and Joven saw his face tighten in displeasure. "Listener Farah, is there some reason you are preventing our passage to Athor Einelmann's home?" "Do not pretend ignorance." The stately, stern woman removed her hood to reveal hair shaven on one side and long, dark braids streaked with silver on the other. She put her hands on her hips and spoke loudly enough for the entire party to hear. "The most revered and wisest of sages voted to have Trem Waterhound executed. Yet we hear rumors that Wrath Ibathor Einelmann returned having failed in his task, and now you bring a group of assorted foreigners into our home without fanfare or public announcement. I sense treachery, and I will know who these people are before they are permitted another step." Caliandra was the one who came forward. Sitting tall on the back of her camel, she looked down at the demanding presence of Farah and proclaimed, "I am Caliandra, priestess of Endoth, god of healing. We have come at the request of Keeper Athor, who I understand is of as highly regarded a status as yourself. Surely you'll not violate the laws of the Dominion of Malaria, and harm us should we attempt to fulfill the invitation of Keeper Athor." Farah's eyes burned into the woman on the camel, whose bold address had brought wide eyes from Wayna and Udo. She seemed to wait for her look to have some effect, but when Caliandra remained unmoved, she said, somewhat more diplomatically than she had before, "We would never harm anyone welcome in Yulinar, but you are not welcome if you bring the foretold destroyer of our home into our midst. Priestess, if your guides will not answer me, then I would ask that you do. Is Trem Waterhound among you?" Before Caliandra could consider a reply, Trem's voice came from behind Wayna and Joven, who were doing their best to keep him hidden. "He is." Despite herself, Farah Ein Tevanir came a few steps forward and looked at a look from her, Wayna and Joven parted, revealing Trem propped up on one elbow on his sled, which was now set on the stones of the square, flanked by his 4 Firecat aides. Farah walked towards him at a steady but unhurried pace and stopped a fair enough distance away to safely examine him. Trem smiled at her. "I'm not sick, nor am I in any condition to harm you. You can come closer, listener Farah." Farah's eyes narrowed as she detected the veiled mockery in Trem's voice, but she took a few more steps towards him and looked down at his broken, scarred form. She studied him thoroughly and then said, "Do you know why I, and many others, wish you dead? Yes, I'm supposed to bring the destruction of this city, at least according to your prophecies. It's not a mere prophecy," Farah's voice was chiding. "It's the might of the Eversand, invoked to determine what we must do to preserve our people and culture. It's meant to guide us to what should be done to preserve more than just the Dominion," Udo interrupted. Farah glared at the traveler and continued. "The visions of the Eversand were very clear. The longer you remain alive, the more Yulinar and possibly the whole of the Dominion will be completely obliterated. So kill me now." There was a terrible silence as both the Malarian contingent and Trem's allies took in his coldly delivered response. Farah Ein Tevanir held his eyes for some time, and he could see clearly she was carefully weighing whether it would be worth it to doom herself in taking his life then and there. Trem returned her look calmly, apparently unfazed, by the tension emanating from their silent standoff. Farah at last uncrossed her arms and said, "You truly would invite me to do it, or at least to try. Part of you relishes the threat of death, but another part is intoxicated with the persistence of your life." She watched him with a small smile as Trem squirmed at last under her scrutiny, feeling her boring into his mind and thoughts. "Go then, Trem Waterhound. Go and meet the traitorous Athor Einelmann. Should the sages uphold their decision, she will not have the power to spare you from what was ordained." Farah turned and stepped aside, setting herself against the stone of one of the intricate buildings that formed the mouth of the street. The contingent of listeners, tellers, and speakers that had come with her also parted, forming a tunnel of damning eyes for those bound for Keeper Athor's home to pass through. Udo led the way, his normally pleasant hint of a smile gone, stern eyes looking firmly forward. Wayna came behind him, her face downcast, and the troop of outsiders followed, somewhat confused and defensive over the encounter. When they had passed the last of the opposition, the robed sages turned and marched through the square, where the milling crowd was whispering and pointing at the new arrivals from a safe distance. They walked and rode in silence down the main street, turning a short time later and arriving at the doors of a marvelous-looking estate. The home of Athor Einelman would have fit in well in a more fertile land, decked as it was with various plants and vines that covered the exterior in carefully cultivated patterns. The windows were thrown open at every floor, and a soft white curtains fluttered in a faint breeze. Udo dismounted at the fine-looking doors of soft brown wood and knocked confidently. There was only a brief wait, and then both doors were pushed open by bare-chested men in tan, billowy cloth pants and fine slippers. Udo beckoned the others to follow as more servants came out to take their mounts and lead them around the side of the home. The Firecats brought Trem in and deposited him at the entryway, taking their leave of the party at that time. As the doors closed behind them, soft footfalls could be heard on the great staircase before them. The interior was decorated in the finest of porcelain vases, some twice as tall as any of the party, and a number of beautiful white pillars carved into intricate representations of the first gods. The staircase came down into considerable width directly in front of the travelers, and, as one went up, it split to form two paths, leading to wrapping balconies that extended up 7 or more floors above the hall. Above them, a beautiful chandelier of clearest crystal hung, the tinkling of the gems audible in the vast openness of the room. The footfalls on the stairs belonged to a woman dressed in the gray robes of a sage, a keeper, with long hair carefully curled to cascade around her face in beautiful waves. She was clearly not a young woman, but her sense of presence and grandeur of the hall made her alluring and captivating regardless. It helped that she also carried herself with an air of authority and command that immediately awed those standing below her. As she reached the landing before the central stairs, Udo turned to his charges and intoned, "Allow me to present Keeper Athor Einelman, your gracious host." As one, the entire group bowed low to her, excepting Trem, who ducked his head as politely as he could manage. The woman came down the steps wordlessly and stood before them. She held her chin high and took in each of the visitors slowly, one by one, before finally resting her last solemn study on Trem. She walked forward, the others parting way for her as she did, and to the surprise of the whole group, crouched low and smiled welcomingly at him. "Trem Waterhound, it's an honor to finally meet you in the flesh." Trem was unsure how to respond, given the dark tones of his last encounter with the powerful matriarch of the city, but he returned the greeting. "Keeper Athor, the pleasure is ours." She stood then and turned to the others, her lips sealed in a pleasant smile. "Thank you all for coming to Yulinar at my request. I know the journey must have been long and difficult. You can rest here. I have had rooms prepared for you. There are enough ready that you might choose the one that suits you best." She turned back to Trem's litter and looked down at him like a sympathetic mother. "And I am sure you wish to see what can be done for your condition, Trem. My servants will bring you with me. I have called the priests of Endoth and several wise keepers who have studied the healing arts to aid you." Jovan stepped forward. "If it's all right, Keeper, I wish to stay with Trem." Wayna shot him a hard look. "She's not Farah Ein Tevanir, Jovaneleth. You can trust her to be alone with your friend." The mention of the listener brought a dark look to Athor Einelman's face, and Udo was quick to explain their encounter on the streets of Yulinar. By the time he had finished, Athor's anger was visible. She can stake any claim she wants to my violating the will of the sages, but the letter of the decree was that Trem was to be killed before reaching Southron. He is here. The decree is void. She shook her head. "I am sorry you had to be confronted like this. I should have met you at the outskirts of the city, but I was engrossed in my work." "You know it would not have mattered," Udo said. "Farah would have laid down threats the entire city was marching with him." "Too true," Athor admitted. "Let us speak no more of it. Trem, you will come with me, and the rest of you may follow the servants to your quarters. If the rooms do not agree with you, my staff can show you several alternatives. Jovaneleth, if you wish to come with us, you most certainly may." Trem looked at Jovan. "I'll be fine. Go get some rest." Jovan hesitated, but ultimately chose to listen to Trem and follow the others of the servants to where the rooms had been prepared. As they passed, Trem reached out and grabbed Diaga's sleeve. "Diaga, I have to ask you to do something for me." The mage paused. "Of course, Trem." The half-elf reached into his shirt and pulled out the worn wax paper Ghost had given to him. "I imagine you'll spend some time in the Great Library. I need you to look for something in particular." Diaga took the sheet and unfolded it, his brow furrowing. "Are these books? Names?" Trem hesitated. "I don't know exactly. They're names, but they may be authors or references or something else entirely." Diaga cocked his head in confusion, the others having now paused partway up the stairs, watching the exchange. "Who gave these to you?" "Ghost." The mage's eyes narrowed in distrust. "Diaga," Trem's voice was earnest. "I promised him I'd help. It's all he has. He said it would tell him where to go next, and if there's any truth to these weapons he seeks, then the one place he might find reference to them would be in Yulinar." Diaga looked at the others waiting expectantly for him. Then he folded the paper and placed it into one of his pouches. "All right, Trem, I'll see what I can do." That seemed to settle the matter. Diego turned and went up the stairs with the others, taking Caliandra's hand as he did. While they were making their way to their rooms, Wayna took Athor aside briefly. After a short conversation, she bid goodbye to her and Trem before leaving the building. Athor's servants took up Trem's sled, and she walked beside him as they began to climb the stairs. Udo will stay with your friends and see to it they have everything they need and then remain as my guest. Wayna Ainuari must return to the listeners and make a report of her time with you, which I doubt she will enjoy. It is likely Faraz's wrath will fall on her most of all. Is she in danger? Physically, no, but the shame and potential blow to her progress among the listener order could be serious. She took a substantial risk by agreeing to go with Udo and judge your group's fitness to enter the city. Farah had tried to prevent any listener from going, which would have meant you could never come at all. It seems you went to a lot of trouble to get me here, Keeper Athor. I wonder why you would want to welcome the person destined to destroy your home. Athor Ainalman stopped, as did her servants, and turned to face Trem. Destiny is what we choose for ourselves. Fate is what is chosen for us. It seems by my studies that you are fated to lead to Ulinar's fall, but you may be destined to do much more, and for the greater good of Teth Tamir. I voted to spare your life, not because I wished to let the city be destroyed, but because it seemed an overstep of the Dominion to strike at one individual who might be a source of salvation for many, even if it meant our own demise. It remains to be seen if I am correct. She smiled at him and shook her head. We can speak more of such serious matters later. I hear Rath told you that you could be healed here. I will see if I can prove him right. They resumed their journey up the stairs. How did you know what Rath said, or that we were here? Athor gave him a mischievous wink. It is not all magic in the Dominion, and the Watchers are not just our guardians against outsiders. They also make excellent messengers, as do the birds of the Endless Sands. He made certain those who needed to know of you were informed. Trem tried to hold her gaze as he asked, Rath is your son, isn't he? Athor did not say anything for a few moments as they continued to walk. Then she spoke so softly Trem had to strain to hear it. Rath was my son, and now he is a Watcher. He is no one's son anymore. They rounded a corner of the balcony and on the fourth floor, and Athor walked ahead, leading them into one of the open doorways. Within, Trem could see there was a vast bath, large enough for 10 people to share comfortably. There were 3 robed figures within, one dressed in the same gray as Athor, but his cloth was not as finely made. The other 2 were wearing white robes and pendants with the symbol of Endoth on them. Athor spoke to them quietly, and they handed her several small flasks and a bowl of glowing liquid Trem could not identify. They then left, bowing to Trem as they passed. The servants set his sled down on the edge of the pool, and he could see the steam coming off the water. Athor pulled a curtain across the doorway and walked over to him. Well, let's get you into the bath, then, shall we? Trem looked at her in horror, and she burst out laughing. Trem Waterhound, do you think I've not seen a man unclothed before, or is there something about yourself that you especially wish to hide? Trem blushed a bright crimson, and muttered, No, but I imagine the smell. Athor chuckled again and waved her hand in dismissal. Here, let me help you. Together they were able to peel off Trem's shirt with relative ease, and Athor tossed it a fair distance, unable to conceal the wrinkling of her nose. His leather breeches and small clothes took much longer, to Trem's ever-increasing embarrassment. Recognizing his discomfort, Athor kept her eyes averted and her words focused on giving him directions for completing the task. Once he was undressed, Trem pivoted himself towards the water, then said sheepishly, I need some help getting in. Athor came, and much to Trem's surprise, lifted him by his shoulders with relative ease. Trem slid into the pool slowly and gasped the heat, which brought a surge of pain and tingling all over his body. Athor made certain he could support himself safely. Then she took the flasks from behind the bath and set them on the edge, unstoppering the first that held a vibrant yellow liquid. She poured the viscous contents into the water, which absorbed it swiftly, altering the color from a soft blue to a pale green. The second vial was more liquid, and poured out swiftly, tinting the water to a bright but still transparent purple. Trem finally got up the nerve to ask, What is it you're putting in here? Athor set the empty containers aside and lifted the bowl. These were prepared by the Keeper from his and his colleagues' records on powerful healing elements used in the farthest reaches of our world. This bowl, she held the vessel above the water, is from the priests of Endoth, a water infused with prayers and healing powers. She paused as she was about to pour the contents into the bath. This will be painful. Without further warning, Athor dumped the bowl into the pool swiftly. Trem's back arched sharply, and he cried out in excruciating pain. The water seemed to boil and writhe about him, and the scars on his legs and arms arched and undulated beneath his skin. Athor watched him, not unsympathetically, then her hand grasped his hair firmly and pulled his head back. You must be fully immersed. Before Trem could respond, Athor shoved his head under the water. His mouth was still open in protest as he swallowed a great gulp of the bath. Pain continued to streak up and down his body like bolts of lightning, vibrating under his skin and through his veins. He tried to pull himself out of the liquid enveloping him, tried to fight free to stop the pain and breathe, but Athor was impossibly strong and he could not move. Why would she not let him up? Why was she trying to kill him? Trem braced himself for one last surge of effort to break free, and then he was swallowed in blackness. That's chapter 6. I will be posting the next chapter on Thursday, right around 3 o'clock. Try to be a little closer to actual time this time. As always, send questions, thoughts, buy books on the Facebook page for Legacy Chronicle. But you can contact me at Legacy Chronicle on Twitter. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for listening.